How do you bounce back from loss?
So for me, I accept that loss and failure is part of the process to success and getting to whatever our goals are. And so for me, I'm paying attention to how I'm framing what has happened. Am I looking at it as something that I am able to learn from, or is it something that I can't make an adjustment on? And so I have a list that I go through personally when I look at things to make sure that I don't repeat a failure, or that I can ensure to the best of my ability that the loss isn't something that keeps coming back. So I focus on the things I can control. What were the conditions I could control within that? I focus on the things that I do have as a result of that. What are the lessons, the resources, the experiences I gained from it that I can use? And then I don't really dwell on the past in fear of repeating it. And I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about the future. I stay in this present moment and continue to create the world I want. And so I look at failure as an opportunity to get better. And if you study success literature and successful people enough, you'll start to realize most of them learned far more from their failures and their losses than they did success. Hope that helps.
There was a really interesting study that was done, I think over 10 years ago now, that showed that emotional intelligence was actually a better indicator or leading indicator of success than IQ was, right? And that, for some people, can be a shocker. And then for others of us, we're like, no, that makes sense. You see enough very, very smart people that are not very successful, and you get it. So how do we develop our emotional intelligence? I think by slowing down and become more present, become more aware of ourselves and the other. It's an exercise in awareness. One, becoming more aware of what we're experiencing. So getting good at labeling our emotions so that we can describe what it is we're experiencing. So depending on how emotionally intelligent somebody is, they may label everything anger, for instance, and they describe whatever they're feeling as anger. Or maybe they don't even give it a name. They just, describe it in a word or a expression. Like there's no ability to express what they're feeling. Well, that's somebody we would say has a pretty low level of self-awareness, and thus probably not very emotionally aware. So beginning to understand and be able to put words to the emotions that we're feeling and where we are feeling them is a great step towards becoming more emotionally aware. Also becoming more aware of the other and beginning to become more aware of their emotional place and what they're experiencing in the moment can also be very useful, especially if you're a coach, a teacher, you're in sales, you're in leadership. Your ability to read the room and understand what the emotional state of the room is really important. Now, I think most of us come in, if not everyone, comes in with a pretty good built-in sense of emotional intelligence, but we diminish it over time and we mute it. So for instance, when you were a kid, you probably knew pretty darn well if you walked into the room whether one of your parents was upset or not, especially mom, right? If you came home after school and mom was upset, you may not even see her. She may be upstairs in another room, but as soon as you walk in the door of the house, you're like, ooh, you could literally feel it. What happens though, sometimes as a coping strategy, we then turn off this because we don't want to experience it or we don't want to feel it, especially with people that are more empathic. One of the ways they deal with it is by trying to numb it and turn it off because they don't like what they're experiencing because they haven't developed the gift enough to know what to do with it, so they just ignore it. And so taking the time to actually label and understand your emotions and what others are experiencing, and that means slowing down, is a huge step towards becoming more emotionally intelligent. Hope that helps.
Any advice for self-trust and self-esteem?
This is always an interesting question, and it comes in a couple of different forms. If somebody has a hard time trusting themselves or has a low self-esteem, that's almost always a result of experiences that have been added to their person. Meaning, when you drop in here, I think you innately trust yourself and you don't generally struggle with esteem. It's a question of identity, ultimately. But then through life experiences and things that we go through, we create labels and add things to ourselves that diminish our sense of trust in ourselves, which ultimately is going to diminish our trust in others. And we diminish our esteem through life experiences. Maybe we had an abusive parent who told us we never amount to anything, or we had a sibling that did that, or we had a teacher that did that, or we just were overly critical of ourselves based on our environment. For me, most of developing one's self-esteem and trust in oneself is simply removing the stories and the beliefs that are limiting our ability to do that. Now, to be sure, It's easier to trust yourself as you apply what you believe in the real world and you begin to gain result. And that's, kind of the process of coming back is to do that. So I tell people routinely, I tell my clients this, trust your gut, trust your intuition, and I will label it that. You may be wrong in doing that, but that's how you learn. I say this all the time. I would rather it be my decision and it be wrong than to outsource that decision to somebody else and it be wrong. And so one of the reasons why we struggle with trusting ourselves is we struggle with the consequences of trusting ourselves. What if we're wrong? In some cases, it's easier just to go, well, I did what they told me to do and it was wrong. So we play the blame game and we pass the buck on to somebody else. Part of taking back autonomy of self is learning to take responsibility for your decisions. And you will learn through that process. And it may be painful, by the way. Right? Trusting your gut or trusting your intuition as you're learning how to reconnect with yourself, you may make some really bad decisions or decisions that you're going to be disappointed in. That's okay, as long as you learn from them, because that's going to get you on the path of discovering who you really are, and eventually that will clean itself up. Where we get into trouble is we outsource our thinking to someone else, we outsource our esteem to someone else, and then we're always dependent on the other for these things. That is the path to the dark side. I spend a lot of time talking about success as a generic term, but I don't think it's my place to tell someone else what success is to them. Success, I think, is very personal. I think it's very subjective. But as I've said many times, what I have noticed over a decade of coaching different clients and thousands of people, it generally has three components. Even if it's a stay-at-home mom who's defining success by how she manages the home, or somebody who is in a career C-suite position, it has three components. I want to be financially free, or I don't want to be worried about resources. I want to have healthy relationships, and I want to be healthy in my body. Generally, all three components show up when somebody's trying to define success for themselves. But I think one of the more underrated positions in our society right now is mothers, is parenting. It's hard to argue that there is a more significant position in the development of the next generation than great parents, and specifically in this context, a great mother. And so being able to define what that looks like for you is what's most important. And one of the lessons that I learned very early on is do not look to others to validate your definition of success. Don't care whether or not somebody else thinks you're successful by their standards. You're not living up to their standards. The only person's standard you need to live up to is your own. The blueprint for happiness is living up to your own expectations, not others. And where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble is we start looking around and we let others tell us what success is supposed to look like. So you didn't say this, but I'm going to intuit this a little bit. If you feel frustrated or not validated because your version of success isn't having a career where you're making millions of dollars, but raising healthy children who are smart, they can make decisions for themselves, they're independent, and you have a healthy home environment where your family feels loved and supported, I think that's freaking awesome. Don't turn around though and go, I need other people to validate this as successful. That's your version of success. And to be fair to anyone who's listening who's like, hey, don't invalidate or challenge somebody else's versions of success. That's, hey, success for me is taking care of my family. It's being married to the same person for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's having a healthy home environment for my kids. That's an incredible version of success. Everyone is different though. You just need to be clear on what your version is and hold the line on that. So, and when I talk about success, although I use a lot of examples in business, contextually because of my audience, the reason I talk about success at all is in the pursuit of whatever it is you're after, you will have to confront you. The areas of your life, your character, your mentality, and your skill sets that are holding you back from achieving your definition of success, not mine. And this is important to understand. So my context isn't ever to tell somebody, this is what you should be to be a success. It's, hey, what do you do when you are confronted with those areas of life that are limiting what you want from your life? Not what I want for your life, but what you want for your life. That's where the work really begins. Thank you for the question.